Let's bring in someone who took part in the very first Earth Day following his return from the war in Vietnam. Former U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. Mr. Secretary, great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
We really do appreciate it, Mr. Secretary. We're going to reach a terrible milestone in the coming weeks. It's hard to believe we're going to get there, but if you look at the data, if you look at where the lines are going, where the numbers are going, probably by next week, more Americans will have died of COVID-19 than died in combat during the Vietnam War. And as someone who saw the human loss during that war and saw up close the scale of that loss and how it impacted an entire generation, I'm curious what your thoughts are as we do approach that grim milestone.
Well, Joe, it's great to be with you and with Mika and with the team, and I'm glad you're all well and safe in these difficult times. Obviously, it's a stark reminder that if you don't learn the lessons of history, you're doomed to repeat them. It's a different kind of dying, but it's coming from misinterpretation, from ignoring reality. It's coming from an unwillingness to respond to the truth and to the lessons that we have learned. The fact is that coronavirus may be America's moment of truth, in the sense that a lot of us were despairing that we were losing the capacity to decide in our country, in our democracy, what the baseline of truth is. And there has been a different kind of war taking place. It's a war on science. It's a war on scientists. It's a war on facts. It's a willingness to completely distort the truth in favor of an ideology or of personal election pursuit or whatever. And we're losing lives for that, which is not dissimilar to what Richard Nixon, Lyndon Johnson, and others engaged in during that time of deception when America was lied to about the war in Vietnam. There's another similarity to this great cause that we face, really the monumental choice of generations now, which is responding to the climate crisis. The same willingness to distort the truth, to put your head in the sand and not pay attention to the facts, and mostly to listen to the experts, that has characterized coronavirus, which brings you a pandemic, is the same mischaracterization and avoidance of truth that has characterized the response to climate and the climate crisis. So what Corona is really saying to Americans is, hey, wait a minute, folks. It's important to listen to the experts. It's important to listen to scientists. It's important to find a baseline of truth and make the choices on it. So coronavirus may be America, the world's great wake-up call with respect to the challenge of climate, because this is coming at us. If you think pandemics are bad today, wait till you have the warming at a greater level than it is now, and we're headed there. Every scientific report and judgment shows that we are heading into amazing negative impacts. The feedback loops on the Earth are just horrendous right now. I'm not going to go through them all, but so that's the meaning of the deaths thus far. And yesterday was the highest number of deaths. And still, this president is avoiding responsibility for testing.
I want to ask about his leadership in just a moment, but in terms of those parallels that you draw between coronavirus and the climate crisis, and you've got a piece about it, I believe, in the Boston Globe, the one difference, though, is that the consequences, the impact of this pandemic is palpable to all Americans, to people around the world. They are seeing the death. They are feeling the loss. They are feeling the pain. They are seeing the strain that our economy and our families are going through. It's going to be tougher. And what is going to be the way to connect the climate crisis to the consequences? Because people are going to try and go back to their ways as much as they can.
Sure. On day one, no question about it. I mean, it's a wonderful reminder that people in India can see the Himalayas for the first time, and many of them first time ever. It's extraordinary to see clean waters in Venice and so forth. But boy, is that temporary, Mika. The day people actually can really get back to work, we are unfortunately absolutely programmed to go directly back to the same practices we've had. The key here is to put an investment package before the world and to have world leaders come together, because this is a global challenge. You cannot solve this. No one country can solve this by itself, which is the importance of what we achieved with President Obama in Paris. The Paris Agreement was 196 countries all deciding to move in the same direction. Only Donald Trump, he's the only president in the world, leader of any country, who has pulled out of that agreement, who has turned his back on reality. And so, unfortunately, we're currently programmed to go directly back to the very same practices that will fill our skies with pollution and go back to the old practices. The difference, I think, will be that this could become a major voting issue this November. That's what Earth Day meant to us before, and that's what I think will happen now.
I want to ask you about the president's leadership through this. You've met and worked with many presidents. There has been some disinformation in these briefings. Much of it has come from the president himself. Are you worried at all that he may not have the temperament to manage America through this crisis, and the possibility that there could be a massive resurgence because of that lack of ability to manage?
Well, Mika, I don't think it's just a question of temperament. I think it's a question of capacity and an approach to governance. Look, the truth is, and everybody in America, I think, is beginning to come to understand it, this president is not leading now. He's playing out an election strategy. He's more focused on getting the economy moving before all the experts say you ought to be putting people back together in close quarters again. And without the adequate rules by which people will be required to behave, and certainly without the adequate testing that other countries are doing. I think Mike Barnacle a moment ago listed the country, almost 20 countries or more. I mean, most of the countries dealing with this crisis at a high level are doing better than the United States of America on testing. And the truth is, you cannot get us back to real normal. You cannot get the economy churning at the rate it wants to and needs to unless American citizens have confidence when they come back to the workplace, and they won't today. So you're not going to fill restaurants. You're not going to get people out there when the medical experts are saying, you know, it's not safe to do it yet. And the president is not heeding that. He's not leading. The fact that he's attacking governors, he's attacking members of the media. I mean, these rallies that he has on TV may appeal to his base, but watching a president of the United States engage in such extraordinary behavior, in direct insults to people who are just calmly sitting there asking a question, is stunning. I've never seen any president, Republican or Democrat alike, behave like that. So it may be entertaining as a reality show, but it has no relationship whatsoever to presidential leadership. And that's what Americans are judging now to a greater degree, and I am absolutely convinced will judge as we get into November. But you know, even leaders of other countries are looking at America and scratching their heads and incredulous. And President Xi of China, who Trump varies between attacking and then saying he's such a good friend, the President Xi and President Putin and others are well aware that the United States is not competing in the same way as we did in the international leadership scale. And so the leader of the free world is actually absent right now. There is no leader of the free world. And the truth is that President Xi and President Putin are running around the world saying America is a country in decline. This is not the American century, it's the Chinese century or the Asian century or the alternative government century. Yep. We desperately need to get back to more realistic and focused leadership on a global basis.
Secretary Kerry, it's Willie Geist. Good to see you this morning. You mentioned China as Secretary of State. You, of course, had to deal with China and a complicated relationship, of course. So I'm wondering about your view of the way China has managed this from its first case on December 31st forward, silencing doctors, suppressing information, not being forthcoming or transparent with the way they told the world about this. And the president of our country has rightly pointed out that if we'd known sooner, we could have done more. How do you handle China right now, and how damaging is their behavior over the last 3 months to our relationship with them?
Well, it's been damaging, and other things are damaging about the relationship with China in terms of a general move towards trying to tee up China and a new Cold War, and many forces trying to push apart the capacity to be able to build a stronger relationship. That's dangerous. China made mistakes. China, and some of them willful. China was not forthcoming. China was not transparent. And China kicked out the U.S. team that was on the ground that President Obama had put together that was working on precisely coronavirus research and how we manage it. And the president pulled them out. I mean, this was, he's undone that particular initiative completely, closed the office, as we all know, as a matter of record. So, we've both been moving in a different direction. The president's tariffs and his trade war got him an agreement to do what we were already doing, which is have a high-level dialogue and to buy American products. But it did absolutely zero to get us the access to the marketplace, to rebalance the entire issue of theft of intellectual property and the requirements that our companies face to try to do business over there. Completely unfair. The president's correct to call them out on that. We did also. In fact, we raised sanctions with China on North Korea on several occasions, and President Obama's advice, if you recall, to President Trump when he came in was, you've got to pay attention. North Korea is the next challenge. And we have raised the sanctions, but you got to get the Chinese to do more. That went on. But you have to work out a working relationship with China. We brought China to the table. President Obama and Vice President Biden together, and the entire administration worked to get China to the table in Paris. And it was only by working with China that we were able to reach a Paris Agreement where 196 countries said we're going to do something about climate change. So we have to work with China. You have to work with China on COVID-19, on all pandemics. You have to work with China on the security challenges of the region. You have to work with China on cyber and cyber warfare, on nuclear weapons, which are now breaking back into the currency of international affairs as a major issue. And you also have the challenge of climate change. There is no way, therefore, to deal with the world's challenges and finally terrorism. You can't do that without a strong working relationship with China. And right now, I think the president is all over the place and even heading in the wrong direction.
Former Secretary of State John Kerry, boy, do we need your voice. Thank you very much for being on. We hope you come back soon.
Thank you. Good to be with you. Thanks.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.